The year is 415 AD. You are walking through the sun-drenched streets of Alexandria, the greatest intellectual metropolis of the ancient world. Around you, scholars in white linen robes argue fiercely over geometry, astronomy, and the fundamental nature of the cosmos. In the center of this bustling intellectual paradise stand the legacy of the Library of Alexandria, a monumental beacon of human knowledge where the greatest minds have gathered for centuries. The air is thick with the scent of papyrus, incense, and salt water. But beneath this beautiful facade of enlightenment, a dark, violent storm is brewing. The city is rapidly tearing itself apart. Religious zealots roam the streets, hunting down anyone they deem a heretic. And their primary target is not a warlord. It is not a corrupt politician. Their target is a teacher, a woman who drives her own chariot through the chaotic streets, dressed in the simple cloak of a philosopher, commanding respect from everyone who sees her. She is the greatest mathematician of her time. Her name is Hypatia, and this is the tragic, infuriating story of how a brilliant mathematical mind was brutally silenced, marking the beginning of the end for ancient science. The tragic truth behind the death of Hypatia, the great female mathematician. Who was Hypatia? To understand her, you must completely forget the stereotype of the ancient world being a purely male-dominated society of old men with long white beards. Hypatia was a genuine rock star of the intellect. She was born around 355 AD into an environment entirely devoted to learning. Her father, Theon, was a prominent mathematician, astronomer, and the last known head of the Museum of Alexandria. From a very young age, Theon decided that his daughter would not be confined to traditional, restrictive roles placed upon women in antiquity. Instead, he rigorously trained her in mathematics, astronomy, physics, and philosophy. He wanted her to become a perfect human being, a perfect synthesis of a brilliant mind and a disciplined body. And he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. By the time she reached adulthood, Hypatia had not only surpassed her father's intellect, but she had eclipsed virtually every other scholar in the entire city. She eventually became the head of the Platonist school in Alexandria. Imagine walking into a massive, echoing lecture hall in the ancient world. The room is packed to the brim. Students from all over the Mediterranean, Christians, Jews, and pagans alike, have traveled hundreds of miles, crossing dangerous seas, just to hear her speak. She stood at the front of the hall, commanding the room with absolute authority, profound clarity, and a commanding voice. Hypatia did not just teach basic addition or subtraction. She taught advanced, cutting-edge geometry and algebra. She edited and preserved the incredibly complex works of Apollonius of Perga on conic sections. These are the mathematical curves formed by slicing a cone, the exact same mathematics we use today to calculate the orbits of planets, the paths of comets, and the trajectories of modern spacecraft. She also wrote extensive commentaries on the Arithmetica of Diophantus, known as the father of algebra. By deciphering and organizing these complex algebraic equations, she effectively kept the flame of advanced mathematics alive. But her genius was not limited to abstract equations on parchment. She was also a brilliant engineer and astronomer. She constructed astrolabes, complex, highly intricate brass instruments used to model the movement of the planets, map the stars, and calculate time at night. She designed hydrometers to measure the density of liquids. In a world that was slowly beginning to reject physical science in favor of blind faith, Hypatia was the ultimate ancient scientist. For decades, Hypatia was a beloved pride at Alexandria. She was universally respected. She was so revered that even the city's highest political leaders constantly sought her counsel. The Roman prefect of Alexandria, a powerful man named Orestes, frequently visited her home. They would sit for hours, discussing state affairs, moral philosophy, and mathematics. Orestes was a Christian, but he valued her logical, rational mind above all the chaotic political and religious noise of the city. He knew that in a city prone to violent riots, Hypatia was a voice of pure, calm reason. But this very influence, this close friendship with the secular ruler, would ultimately seal her horrific doom. You see, Alexandria was undergoing a massive, brutal cultural shift. The old pagan world of philosophy, rational inquiry, and ancient gods was clashing violently with the rising power of a new, militant, and highly intolerant faction of Christianity. And at the head of this new power was Cyril, the newly appointed Bishop of Alexandria. Cyril was a ruthless, deeply ambitious man who wanted absolute, unquestioned control over the city. He viewed the Roman prefect Orestes as a major obstacle to his authority. But more importantly, he viewed Hypatia as a massive existential threat. Why was she so dangerous to him? Because she represented absolutely everything he could not control. First, she was a woman in a position of immense power and influence. Second, she was a pagan who practiced Neoplatonism, a philosophy that sought the divine through intellectual study and mathematics, rather than through religious doctrine. And most terrifying of all, she taught people how to think for themselves. Hypatia taught her diverse students to use logic, reason, and mathematical proof to understand the universe, rather than blindly following dogma. She once famously said, "Fables should be taught as fables, myths as myths, and miracles as poetic fantasies. To teach superstitions as truths is a most terrible thing." Bishop Cyril knew he could not attack the Roman prefect directly, so he went after his most trusted advisor. Cyril's followers began to spread vicious, calculated rumors about Hypatia. They whispered in the dark alleys and market squares that she was an evil witch. They claimed she used her brass astrolabes and complex geometric diagrams to cast satanic spells on Orestes. They told the uneducated masses that she was bewitching the prefect with dark magic, actively preventing him from making peace with the church. They took her beautiful, rational mathematics, her elegant geometric proofs, and maliciously twisted them into the dark arts of sorcery. The tension in the city rapidly reached a boiling point. The air was electric with hatred, paranoia, and religious fervor. Then, one fateful day in March of 415 AD, during the holy season of Lent, the unthinkable happened. Hypatia was riding in her chariot through the city streets, likely returning home from a brilliant, exhausting lecture on geometry. Suddenly, her path was blocked. A violent mob of religious zealots, a radical group known as the Parabolani, swarmed her chariot. These were not scholars. They were not theologians. They were a violent brotherhood of men who acted as a militant street gang loyal entirely to Bishop Cyril. Screaming accusations of witchcraft, they dragged the 60-year-old mathematician from her chariot. They dragged her through the dirt streets into a nearby church called the Caesareum. There, they stripped her of her clothes in the middle of the sanctuary. And then, in an act of unimaginable, grotesque cruelty, they brutally beat and scraped her to death using ostraca, broken pieces of roofing tiles and sharp oyster shells. They tore her body apart limb by limb. Then, they dragged her mutilated remains outside the city walls and burned them in a massive bonfire. They did not just want to kill her. They wanted completely, totally erase her from human existence. They wanted to destroy the very idea of a rational, questioning mind. When the horrific news of her brutal murder spread, it sent absolute shockwaves through the entire Roman Empire. Even in a brutal ancient world, the savage murder of a respected female philosopher by a religious mob was deeply shocking. The brightest, most radiant light of Alexandria had been violently extinguished. Her death was not just a murder of a brilliant woman. It was a terrifying turning point in human history. After Hypatia's death, a dark chill fell over the city. Many scholars and scientists, fearing for their own lives, packed their scrolls and fled Alexandria in terror. The great intellectual tradition of the city, which had stood for over 700 years, began to rapidly decay. The legacy of the Library of Alexandria slowly faded into absolute obscurity. Mathematics, astronomy, and rational philosophy entered a long, freezing winter in the Western world. The violent mob thought they were destroying a witch, but in reality, they were destroying their own future. For centuries following her murder, Hypatia was nearly forgotten. Her original mathematical writings were lost to time, either destroyed in the chaos of the riots, burned, or simply neglected until they crumbled to dust. We only know of her profound brilliance through the surviving letters of her devoted students, like Synesius of Cyrene, who affectionately and reverently called her mother, sister, teacher, and benefactor. But here is the beautiful truth about mathematics. You cannot truly erase a mathematical mind. The fundamental mathematical concepts she preserved, taught, and expanded upon managed to survive in fragments, carried by fleeing scholars to the East into the Islamic Golden Age. The conic sections she studied with such immense passion eventually found their way back to Europe. directly into the hands of brilliant astronomers like Johannes Kepler centuries later, helping him definitively prove that planets move in elliptical orbits around the sun. Her work on astrolabes paved the way for modern global navigation, allowing humanity to cross massive oceans and map the entire globe. Every time an ancient text of algebra survived to be translated, a piece of her life's work survived with it. Hypatia of Alexandria did not die in vain. She stands today as a powerful, immortal symbol. She represents the eternal, uncompromising struggle between the cold, beautiful truth of scientific reason and the destructive, blinding fire of human ignorance and fanaticism. The next time you look up at the night sky and understand the movement of the stars, or solve a complex equation, or simply use calm logic to navigate a difficult, emotional problem in your life, remember the brilliant woman in the chariot. Remember that the fundamental right to think freely, to seek the truth through numbers, geometry, and observation, is a right that was paid for with blood. A violent, fearful mob burned her body to ashes, but they could never, ever burn her mathematics.